All right. Well, thanks everyone. We're good on Zoom. Casey, I can go. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I just want to make a quick announcement and make sure I get this right. We do have online an American Sign Language interpreter with us on the Zoom link. And so if you are on Zoom, look in your Zoom menu bar for a globe icon to enable the ASL screen. So hopefully everyone heard that. We're super excited to have Greg Nickerson here from the University of Wyoming Migration Initiative. Greg's actually a Wyoming native. He grew up in Sheridan, went to undergrad at the University of Wyoming, where he got a degree in history, and then worked for Wildfile for few years, reporting on different aspects of the state. And in 2016, he started as a writer-filmmaker for the University of Wyoming Migration Initiative. And in that role, he's really contributed to the communication efforts. A lot of you have probably heard of the story of 255, Deer 255. We'll hear about it a little bit today. Greg's been really actively involved in developing a lot of those materials. He's currently working on a book called The Superior Deer, highlighting the story of Deer 255 and discussing how migrations tie into the Rocky Mountain region, human history, and ecology, in this part of the country that we all really love. And I also want to acknowledge that his presentation and residency here today at the University of Wyoming Research Institution at AMK Ranch is supported by a fellowship by the Wyoming Arts Council, 2025 Pattie Laser Greater Yellowstone Creative Writing and Journalism Fellowship. It's a lot of big words for me in this introduction, so bear with me. Greg, thank you so much for coming, and really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Willie. Make sure that all of my buttons are working here. Thank you all for making the trip out here to AMK. Okay, here we go. So thanks to all the folks here at the UW Research Institute at AMK Ranch for having me and hosting me, particularly to Casey and Bonnie and Sarah, Sophie, Charlie, and all the rest of the team that are taking care of this amazing place for research at Grand Teton National Park. And I also want to thank the Wyoming Arts Council for the Pattie Laser Fellowship. Some of you might know her story. She was a woman who first came here to Triangle X Ranch as a young woman and fell in love with the area of the Tetons. And she was an art gallery owner and a writer and a conservationist. And I never got to meet her. She passed away in 2013. But after that, her husband, Earl, gave gifts in her memory to try to answer this question of how we can live in these beautiful wild places and have more and more people moving in and not destroy the very things that we love about them. So hopefully this talk tonight has points to some of those answers to that question. And so I want to dedicate this presentation to Pattie and also in honor of Earl. So tonight we're going to talk about the story of Deer 255. And she is a deer that I have been tracking for about 9 years. And I think that her migrations can help us to understand what I think is an important part of the biological essence of the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. And she was a great teacher, and I think that she can inspire us to help keep these migrations intact in the American West and across the world. Okay, I would make this clicker work. There we go. So late one springtime afternoon, I was hiding under the boughs of a spruce tree, hoping that a specific deer would emerge from the forest. And it was a mild day. There was a cool wind blowing through the aspens and this carpet of green plants that was growing up from the forest floor. If everything worked out as I hoped it would, luck would strike and allow me to see this elusive deer whose whereabouts had preoccupied me for the past 6 years. I was trying to see the particular animal known as Deer 255, who makes the longest deer migration documented by scientists so far. Her journey stretches for more than 200 miles from the Red Desert across the Tetons and into Idaho. For me, this story of Deer 255 is the best tool I have to reveal the mystery of migrations and try to build empathy for these animals that we share the planet with. And that's why I wanted to see this deer in the flesh. Her whereabouts had taken over a big part of my life since I joined the Wyoming Migration Initiative in 2016. By the time I was searching for her in this forest, she was one of the most famous mule deer in the world, and her whereabouts had taken over a big part of my life, as I mentioned. So I parked my truck at the gate of the Little Jenny Ranch, which is above Bondurant in the Gros Ventre Mountains. And I put on a can of bear spray, shouldered a pack with camera equipment and a tripod, and I started climbing to where I thought I would find her. So for the next hour, I was trekking up this steep forested mountain, and I was heading for a GPS point on my mobile phone, which suggested I might have a chance of seeing her. I was on this trip because I'd just gotten a text message from Luke Weil, the graduate student who's leading the Red Desert Pullback Mule project. And he says, she's a lot more north. I put a new point on Onyx. And this is what it looked like on the phone. So this blue dot is me. I'm hiking up 1 mile away from this deer. Meanwhile, this white dotted line is her migration path. She came from the south there on this migration, crossed out of the Little Jenny Ranch and headed up onto the National Forest to the very top of this ridge. As I was hiking up on the mountain, I started noticing all these signs of mule deer. This is the plant Wyethia. It's a kind of a sunflower plant, and it's not blooming yet, but you could see every single one of these plants for the next mile as I was walking had been nipped off by mule deer during their migration. And that's why Deer 255 is on this mountain as well as many other deer. I kept hiking. I started seeing other signs. This is a antler rub on a small tree, so a sign that a buck was there when it was shedding its velvet. Further on, started seeing signs of fresh scat. And then as soon as I saw the first snowbank, I thought, oh, this is a good sign, because as soon as you've seen a snowbank melting in May or June, you're probably going to see a mule deer within the next minute or a couple hundred yards. And that's indeed what happened. These mule deer started running through the woods ahead of me, escaping, trying to get away from this sound of me walking through the woods. And finally, I got to the top of the ridge. I hid out under this tree, and I started looking at this thick grove of aspen trees. At first, it seemed like there was nothing there, but then I started picking up these little glimpses of mule deer hiding there in the woods and some of the best security cover you could find. They had all the food they needed right at their feet. There's no leaves on aspen trees, so lots of sun coming in, and it's all wet. So these plants are just bursting up and sprouting, and the deer can just hang out in there and have everything they need. So I spent about an hour trying to spot Deer 255, looking, staying as quiet as I could. There were plenty of deer. None of them was the one I was looking for. It's 30 minutes, hour, more, and the suspense was just building as I scanned with my binoculars, because I just really wanted to see Deer 255, but there was nothing to do but keep waiting. So this story of trying to spot 255 is just one moment of 8 years of research into this single animal. She's the main character of my book in progress. And during that time, I worked with this amazing team of researchers and cartographers to share the story of her life with the public, along with all the rest of our research that we're working on. Her extraordinary migrations became a path for me to try to understand the importance of big game migrations across Greater Yellowstone, both through science and also through history, which is my background, as we mentioned. So Deer 255's migration route is mapped in GPS coordinates, but I came to see her deeper journey as a path through these stories that are embedded in the land. We're going to talk about some of them today. There's a few main themes that I cover in the book called the superior deer. The first is that she's demonstrating migrations as an essential part of Greater Yellowstone's ecology and geography. She can also tell us a lot about migrations back through deep time in history. And finally, science and storytelling are empowering us to conserve these migrations for future generations. It's happening right now, which is really exciting. So we'll tell some of those stories. And all of this, for me, is conveyed through the story of this single deer. All of this research started out with a guy named Paul Sawyer, my colleague, who in 2011 started a study down in the Red Desert. He was tasked with putting on some mule deer tracking collars on this herd, and he figured that they lived year-round in the Red Desert, just like the pronghorn and the elk do in that area. So the area is clear down south by Interstate 80, near the town of Superior, which is a little bit northeast of Rock Springs. 54 deer were collared in January 2011, the following year, and these are all the animals, and he started collecting this data. Well, everything was going fine, January, February, but then these were the kind of collars where you couldn't get an update in real time. You had to go out there and fly with a radio receiver to try and pick up the signal and see where they were at. So he's hired a pilot to go out there and look up, check in on his deer, and they had all disappeared. The entire herd was vanished. And this kind of thing doesn't really happen very often to biologists. Usually with the airplane, you can find what happened. But what they ended up having to do was fly about 100 miles north and 150 miles north across the Red Desert and clear up the Green River Basin until they found the animals. And this is what it looked like. The animals had migrated out of the Red Desert, across Highway 28, through the Green River Basin, past Pinedale, down into the Hobart Basin, 150 miles away to their summer range. So when Paul saw this happening, he was really excited. This is an incredible migration. To the best of his knowledge, it was the longest distance one that had ever been recorded at that time. And it was a big event. Paul knew that it was important and the news needed to get out there, and he wanted to take an opportunity to tell the world about that. So his first job was to release this report in 2014. At that point, Deer 255 was 9 months old. She was not one of these ones that was collared at that time. Paul wanted to make this more than just a science report for the BLM, and he wanted to share it with the public and spur some action on trying to conserve this really spectacular migration and others like it all through Western Wyoming. And so he teamed up with the photographer, Joe Reese, who started setting out these camera traps to see what these migrations were really like up close and personal. So this is a camera trap at one of the river crossings on the migration. And so those two worked together and they produced a film and a photo exhibit. And along with that, Paul Sawyer and a couple of my colleagues, Bill Rudd and Matt Kaufman, who started the Wyoming Migration Initiative, they put together this migration assessment. So basically, it was a top 10 list of threats along this entire migration corridor. And it's things like highway crossings, fencing, residential development. And that top number one threat was a bottleneck that was only 1/4 mile wide at Fremont Lake that was under threat of being developed. And so this kind of thinking has become a model for how to understand these migrations and also identify the actions that we could take to conserve them. So then that was all really exciting news. And we thought, all right, this is great. We've got a migration that's been studied and the news is out and people are talking about it. So that was great. 2015 goes by, and then in the middle of the summer of 2016, my colleague, Jared Merkel, who had the office just down the hall from mine, he comes over and he says, "Hey, did you hear about Anna's deer? We got to come see this." And so I was intrigued and I went over and we're looking at this map of the Red Desert to Hobart. He says, "Okay, this is what most of the deer are doing, right? We've seen this before for 2 years. We know that this is how they migrate. But look what this one deer did. It went 100 miles further than all the rest, right? Left Hobart, went around the Grove, crossed Moran, went into Grand Teton National Park, the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Parkway, touched the corner of Yellowstone, just to say she did it, and then ended up in Island Park in Idaho, over the Tetons. And we were I kept looking at this, Jared and I, we couldn't figure out what this means. Like, did she just disperse and decide that her great summer range in the Hobart wasn't good enough? why did she do this? Is she gonna just stay in Idaho for the rest of her life and join up with the mule deer over there? We didn't really know, and all we could do was wait. So we were really excited to see what she would do next, because if she actually migrated back to the Red Desert, then this is the record holder of all deer. But before we could get the answer to that, before her fall migration started, we had this bad news, which was August 7th, 2016. We got this GPS point, and then her collar just stopped working. She went silent. We had no idea what had happened to her. She was off the map. It didn't seem like she had died, because the GPS signals, they sent out a mortality signal. We weren't getting that. So something had happened, malfunction of the collar, and we completely lost track of her. So she could be anywhere at this point. She could be in Idaho. She could be in Idaho Falls. She could, be in Bozeman. I don't know. But we thought, well, that was cool anomaly, but that's the end of the story. And what we were left with was this incredible map of these three major migration strategies at different distances. And this is an important point, that not all of the 1,800 mule deer down from the Red Desert make this long distance migration. They've got a portfolio of different strategies, and some are the long distance, some are medium, 70, 80, 100 miles up here to the Wind River Range. Those are the medium distance ones, the South Pass area. Some even wrap around towards Lander. And then there's these short distance ones that actually never leave the Red Desert. Three different strategies. The long distance ones are the most numerous. The short distance ones are the least numerous. And what we're seeing here is this beautiful example of something that's fundamental to the ecology of Greater Yellowstone and really all the American West. And what animals have to do to make a living in this landscape is to move between some of the snowiest places in winter to the driest deserts. And then in spring, they reverse that course back. So this is the Red Desert down here, where all of these deer were captured. And here's the Hoback Basin. So great place to be in springtime, but it's way too snowy for mule deer in wintertime. Same thing with the Tetons, right? Super snowy area. So all these animals have to evacuate. And there's this very convenient gradient where the snowfall is deep at Pinedale, standing on the ground. The further you go on, it gets lighter and lighter. And then you've seen this in the winter if you've ever driven to Rock Springs. Pretty soon, it's bare ground. And that's all because of these mountains, the rain shadows, and the way they collect snow in certain places, and it all piles up there. And then in this Red Desert area, it's one of the driest places in all of Wyoming. And deer know that. They take advantage of it. So as far as why she came all the way up here to Hoback, Grand Teton, Idaho, it's because this is one of the wettest places in all of the interior mountains in the American West. And we've got this moisture channel thanks to the Greater Yellowstone, the Yellowstone hotspot moving up over millions of years, carving this flat area through the Snake River Plain. The moisture from the Pacific Ocean comes up and it sweeps in all the way in with nothing to stop it until it hits the Tetons, and then bam, it all snows here, deep snow, especially in this northern part of Jackson Hole, right? Same thing down the Wyoming Range, Hoback, all of that, some of the best, wettest, most lush mountains that we have in all of Wyoming. And you can see that in this map. So the bright red and purple, that's the heaviest precip for annual precip we get. In Island Park, it's 30 inches of rain a year. Here, where we're standing at AMK Ranch, is about 60 inches of precip a year, right? This is a really great area. And that extends down the Wyoming Range. You've got some nice wet spots there. But then look down here at Superior, Wyoming, in the Red Desert, less than 10 inches of precip a year. So that's a great place to spend the winter and not have to deal with all this snow. So these animals have figured all these places out over many generations, and they're making their living off of it. That they can gain as much fat as possible up here in the wet areas and then burn it off as slowly as possible down in the deserts in the wintertime. So the map is one thing, but what does it look like on the ground with the deer migrating? In 2018, in May, I took this road trip along the corridor. I drove it in the springtime so I could see for myself what the animals are seeing. I started here in the Lucite Hills, which are these volcanic buttes right outside of Superior. And in the winter, their slopes have plenty of forage, things like sagebrush, mountain mahogany. They're blown clear, but by May they're dried out, and there isn't much forage, and therefore there's not very many deer. So the animals have headed north. There's about 1,800 of them, and they join with several thousand more in the Prospect Mountains area, and they all start heading across these streams that are coming out of the Wind River Range, places like Boulder Lake, Fremont Lake, Willow Lake. And along the way, they have to cross these 100 or so fences. And while that's usually no problem, these deer are good at jumping or crawling under, they can be deadly if they get their feet tangled in while jumping over. So there's some risk involved with this. Then once you get up to Pinedale, you actually get to the Fremont Lake bottleneck, and this is conveniently labeled for anyone who wants to go see it. This is the spring and fall mule deer migration corridor. So this has been a heavily identified place, and it's really important for these deer to get through this quarter-mile area. If they go through a little bit too early in the spring, there's ice that's still on that part of the lake, and they can fall in through that thin ice and struggle to get out. So they face a lot of natural obstacles along this migration as well. Most of them get out, but occasionally there's ones that get stuck, and they're out floating. Didn't make it. So then they've got to cross the highway, the Cora Highway, and head on to the rest of the Green River Basin. Amazingly, on this entire route, they only have the two paved highways to cross. They've got the South Pass Highway, and then they've got the Cora Highway. And then that's all that stands between them for 150 miles from the Red Desert to the Hoback. And all along the way, they're stopping over and they're eating this forage that's at this peak level of green up. And so this is a arrowleaf balsam root, another one of the plants that they like. And you probably recognize down here, this is one that hasn't bloomed yet. Mule deer has been there. When I took this photo just around the corner, I found this group of deer. The rain had just fallen, they're wet, and this soon-to-be mama deer is chomping on a lupin shoot. And the little buck has his antler bud show. So this is up by Willow Lake, right outside of Pinedale. Where they're finally heading is this destination, Mule Deer Shangri-La of Hoback Basin, Wyoming, near Bondurant. And it's a place that's used by pronghorn, by elk, by moose, and mule deer. In the winter, it's subarctic, right? It's a great place for snowmobiling, an ice box, right? The snow comes in and it stays all winter real heavy. But that means that in the springtime, it's wet, and it's one of the most lush places in the entire summer. You can even see how green it is here, and then up top, you still have more snow that's going to be melting, keeping this whole area green and lush, and that forage at the ideal stages. So springtime can last here for a long time. It's not just it greened up and it's gone. It can last more than a month or two in an ideal year. And that's why animals migrate more than 100 miles to get here. I drove up all the different side roads out of Bondurant on this trip, and that was such a neat experience, because you leave the highway, you go up into the hills on these Forest Service roads, and you see things like this, a mule deer that's ripping those leaves off of an aspen. And it was just amazing to see everything happening right before my eyes. Like the deer getting stronger, they're growing antlers, the newborn fawns are nursing, and it's all migration. This is the whole reason why they do all of this. And they have extreme fidelity to these roots and this way of life. And that is what brought Deer 255 back to us. In 2018, April 6th, we recaptured her down in the Red Desert. That old collar was still on her neck, still not transmitting, but a helicopter spotted her with his eyes. And we were able to put a new collar in and start tracking her again. We mapped everything that she did since. So just to give you perspective again, up here in the summer range in Idaho, that's when her collar stopped working, August 7th, 2016. That fall goes by, the entire year, 2017 goes by, no sightings, no idea where she's gone. The entire winter of 2017, 2018 goes by, and finally March 12th, 2018 is when we, excuse me, I think I have two different dates on there, but yes, we recaptured her that spring. And so that confirmed that she's making this migration between these two very distant seasonal ranges. And so we had a record holder of 242 miles she was migrating. She migrated all the way back to Idaho in summer 2018, and then we saw her again in 2019. And she was always one of the heaviest deer out of this entire herd. She was also just large in size. And I tend to think that that is a sign that her mother was fit and healthy and had as much food as she needed, and probably her grandmother too. And so when that happens through generations, it turns on these epigenetic switches, and her genes are able to kind of grow to their largest expression. And so that's just a really interesting thing to see. When we handled her and put on the collar, it was always so special to be so close to this deer. She was kind of just particularly, she had a really strong personality, right? She'd kind of sit up and hold her head up and just be listening, even with her blindfold on. And it was really amazing to be able to, put our hands on her and touch her on her forehead, behind which is her brain, has all this migration knowledge. It was a powerful experience. So in August 2019, we released the first of several animations about deer 255's migrations. This is her fall 2018 trip, and she's headed south from Highland Park. You can see she's crossed a little corner of Yellowstone, through the Rockefeller Parkway, through Grand Teton National Park. She's coming around the Grove, stopping over in Granite Creek by the hot springs there, going through Hoback Basin, across the Green River, and then she's hitting these bottlenecks at Willow Lake, Fremont Lake, Boulder Lake, and heading on down through these Wind River foothills. This part right here is the Prospect Mountains, where there's often a big stopover there in November. That's where a lot of breeding happens, where the next year's fawns are conceived. She's crossing the Kilpicker sand dunes and finally headed off into the Red Desert. So 52 days to make that trip across 242 miles. This is such a cool thing to be able to see through this data, and the public really responded. We had millions of people that watched these animations that we released over the next couple of years. So in tandem with all this movement data, we have this really interesting physiological data. There's a lot of numbers up here. This is the only major chart we're going to work through together. But she starts in 2013. We'll just take it column by column. She's born. We collar her in 2016, and we have data missing in 2017, and then we return in 2018 all the way until 2024. Next column, her age. We think she was 2 years old when she was first collared. We missed her 3-year-old year, and we followed her all the way until she's almost 11 years old, 10 years and 10 months. Now, the next part, I want to just focus on the consistency here. So when she's a 2-year-old, this is common. She just has one fawn. Usually that happens. They're not fully mature, but beyond that, it's two fawns that she's giving birth to every single year. Just bam, bam, bam. That her reproductive cycle is working, and she's strong and healthy, and she's able to just look at this. It's, that's 13 deer that we know, or pregnancies that we know she had, and it's probably 15 in total if you count that missing deer. Next one, we know all this by fetal ultrasound, field captures. Kevin Monteith and all of his crew are the ones who collect this data. So fetal eye diameter is a measure of how healthy the fetus is as it's growing in March. The first year, 7. So kind of a small fetus, not keeping up with the gestational development very well. But then from after that, it's just consistent. 16, 17, 16 millimeters. And then as she gets a little bit older, it's a tiny bit behind at 15. But still, these are healthy fetuses that she's carrying. Next thing, we have her December body fat. So we actually captured them with the helicopter net gun crew twice, in December and in March. In December, going into winter, we know their max body fat for the year. This is what they carried with them off of the summer range. So she's at 10.4% in 2019, 11%. 2021, not quite as good of a year. That could have been a selection of summer range. It could have been a drought year. There are various things. 8 and then 10. So she's still packing on the pounds when she's an 11-year-old deer, which is pretty old for a mule deer. And then the really amazing thing is this March body fat percentage. Look how consistent this is. Wherever she starts, it doesn't matter. She burns off and gets to 5.9 every year. It's her sweet spot. She does it every single year. And even when she's approaching 11 years old, she keeps 6% of it. And I think I know why. Potentially it's because she lost a fawn on winter range. It might be that, who knows? There could be a lot of things, but just look at that consistency. It shows that she's got this variable metabolism. Look at the year she came in with only 6%. She barely lost any. When she comes in at 10, she's burning off, 4%. So just really different, really interesting to see that metabolism come down. We're going to skip the fat differential column and then look at this other consistent thing. Her birthday, for when she gives birth to the fawns, it's always in the middle of June. June 7th. The latest is June 19th, 12 days later. And it's just bam, bam, bam. Look how consistent that is. So this is an amazing deer showing us pretty much the best a mule deer can do. She's got the best summer range. She's as big as she can be. Her fawns are as healthy as she can be. And when all that aligns, she's producing 15 fawns over her lifetime. And this is the kind of reproduction you need to keep a herd abundant across hundreds of deer, thousands of deer across the American West. If they can keep up with this level of reproduction, then they can handle all of these things like bad winters, droughts, accidents, predation, etc. most of the time. And that's why these migrations are happening all over the West. We've got all these different species that are all doing essentially the same thing. And her life is a version of what all these animals are doing anywhere in the Western states where we've mapped them. Just to help you interpret this a little bit, the purple are the mule deer, the orange are the pronghorn, and the green are the elk. The yellow is moose up here by Grand Teton where we're at, and the blue is bison. Okay, so really amazing ecology going on all across the American West. They're all migrating between these summer and winter ranges. They're picking up the best food along the way and maximizing their resources and shelter. And ultimately, that's what underpins abundance for all these herds on our entire half of the continent. Okay, I think we've covered the ecology part pretty well. I also want to talk about the history of this, that migration has persisted through a long period of time. So as a historian, one of the things I ask is how far back does this go? And one answer that I've kind of chuckled at is that it could go back to the dinosaurs, because we have these dinosaur gastroliths, these gizzard stones that dinosaurs picked up in Wisconsin, and they carried over here to Wyoming. 150 million years ago, they did this. That's a 600-mile trip. We can't really say that that's a migration. And by the way, the Rocky Mountains didn't exist at that time. But it's really cool, and it shows you that movement is part of life for animals. It has been since animals existed. And in our part of the world, people have been interacting with these migrations for thousands of years, weaving their lives into this ecology. And one of our best examples of this is at Trappers Point, where the overpass is right near Pinedale. Pronghorn move across this narrow geographic bottleneck between two river valleys, and today they encounter, looks like I've lost my volume here. Today they're encountering Highway 191. So this is just a few miles from where deer 255 migrates. And a couple decades ago, the archaeologists were surveying this area and they were preparing for widening the road. And they found more than 1,500 pronghorn bones in this bottleneck and stone butchering tools. And some of the bones were from these little tiny fetal pronghorn, which suggests that their mothers were killed during their spring migration. And the amazing thing is this site was actively hunted by people from 5,000 years ago at different times going back to 8,000 years ago, and before the pyramids were built, right? That's how durable migration and human connection to it can be. The Eastern Shoshone Business Council, when they talk about the Red Desert, they say it's been an important cultural landscape for the Shoshone Nation and our ancestors for thousands of years. And when they say things like this, we should be thinking how big game migrations tie into this. There was a Shoshone elder named Roberta Ingavo, and she said to me that the animals are our teachers. And certainly the Shoshone learn from migratory animals in the Red Desert. And we can know that from things like this. This is the White Mountain petroglyphs. You've got a bison figure here, and inside the fetus, a pregnant bison cow in the Red Desert. When we see this, it's suggesting that people were also in the Red Desert in the wintertime at the same time these pregnant bison would be here, having migrated to this area. And other animals as well, pronghorn, elk, mule deer, all in this area in the wintertime. On this cultural map of the Red Desert, I want to call attention to the petroglyphs. So they're down here on the lower left, right? And there's this other spot that I want you to notice. It's called Indian Gap. And this is along a human travel route that went from the desert through the sand dunes, headed up north. Look what it's paralleling. The Red Desert to Hobart mule deer corridor. And this black star is the last spot where I saw deer 255. This is a historic trail used by Native people, and it's just a few miles from where the deer are moving today. So there's a lot of overlap here, and it keeps going. The Shoshone, when ethnographers went and talked to them, they talked about their travel routes. Going up through the Green River Basin, camping at places like Willow Lake, crossing Boulder Lake at pretty much the exact same spot where the mule deer are crossing today. When the Shoshone are moving up, they had a trade fair up there just north of Pinedale. That's the place where the fur trade rendezvous were established in the 1830s. And it's right where deer 255 and this herd are migrating through each spring. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of layers to the humans and animal movements. It's even seems to be present up in Hobart Basin. So this is at Little Jenny Ranch. This is the hill I climbed to go find deer 255. And when I talked with the crew on the ranch later, they said, "Oh yeah, that gap between the two ridges, we call that the Indian Trail." And I said, "Well, what's the story about that?" They didn't immediately know, but this again suggests to me that there's a human travel route right in line with the way these mule deer are migrating. And that, knowledge of that could go back to the Homestead era potentially. And so the point I'm trying to make is this is just a few local examples, but essentially anywhere that you have animal migrations today in the Rockies, it's very likely that there's archaeological evidence of people hunting these food resources and leaving behind cultural traces, whether it's pictographs in the Wind River Valley, the obsidian chips and hunting blinds that are all through the Absaroka Range, or a mile-long drive line in the mountains above Winter Park, Colorado. There's just so many different examples of this, and this is what people have known about these migrations for a long, long time. And they're also wrapped up in the history of the settlement of this land. Deer 255's migration moved through habitats where these conflicts played out. She went right by Battle Mountain, which is in Hobart Canyon. And this is where a posse rounded up some Bannock elk hunters and marched them into Jackson at gunpoint in 1895. And that really ended indigenous hunting in this area. So it's a complicated landscape. Deer 255 is also moving through some of the most significant places associated with our conservation history. Grand Teton National Park, the first forest, some of the first forest reserves in the 1890s that were created. Yellowstone Park, she's touching our first national park. And it's a fair question to ask whether she would even exist were it not for these protected habitats and the state enforcement of wildlife laws over the past century that allowed these wildlife populations to bounce back from near extinction. And Deer 255 is also migrating through a place that's significant to the history of big game migration science. It's right in this neighborhood in Greater Yellowstone, where Wyoming's big game migrations were first studied in detail using colored neck bands, ear tags, and things like this in the 1960s and even earlier, when they were just tracking or counting tracks through the snowdrift, right here in this side of Jackson Hole. It's also the place where the first GPS tracking collar was placed on an elk in 1970. And since then, multiple generations of biologists have done 45 years of radio collar GPS research, the National Park Service, Wyoming Game and Fish, and others. And that's all led us to find animals like Deer 255 in 2016. And today we understand that she's migrating in one of the best conserved migration ecosystems on the planet, overlapping migrations of 7 different species of ungulates and their predators. It's amazing that this natural system persists in our highly developed country of 340 million people in the 21st century. But migratory animals like Deer 255 are here today because of the actions that previous generations of humans have taken. And so that brings us to this next section, which is that we now have such good science about this that we are empowered to keep these movements intact for the generations that come after us. And that's a really good thing because mule deer are in a lot of trouble right now. Over the last 20, 30 years, they've seen their population basically get cut in half. It's a combination of threats. It's severe winters, it's drought, it's the shortening of green up, it's disease, increasing development and traffic, fences, and habitat loss of all kinds. And so it used to be enough to just regulate hunting to keep these migratory populations healthy. But now that's no longer the case as our human population is growing and animals are facing more and more pressures. So a couple of years ago, I was at a museum in Dublin, Ireland, and I saw this incredible specimen of an Irish elk. This is the largest species of deer that ever lived. Its antlers are 12 feet wide. Look above you. That's like 12 feet up to the ceiling, right? Huge, huge animal. They're extinct, right? If that can happen to the largest deer that ever lived. And in fact, it's still happening today. We've had a local extinction here in Idaho where the last remnant of caribou that lived up in northern Idaho in the mountains, they got down to just 2 or 3, 4 animals, and they went in and they captured them and took them up to Canada, where they figured that they could survive better with other populations of mountain caribou. So these things are happening right now, right? If mule deer numbers are half what they were 30 years ago, where are they going to be in another 30 years? Fortunately, as my supervisor, Matt Kaufman, says, we have some tools. We have all of the data that we probably need to try to get to work on conserving these migratory populations and addressing a lot of these problems right now. We can do a lot to help this start turning it around. And fortunately, we're already making a lot of progress right here in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. One of the best examples of that is near Pinedale at Fremont Lake. That spot, that's the mule deer migration is a 1/4 mile wide. Deer 255 and her fawns migrating through this area. The year she was born was the year that this little section of land right here, the Luke Lynch Wildlife Habitat Management Area, was started to be conserved. With the data in hand, the late Luke Lynch was able to raise $2 million and buy this piece of land that was slated for housing development, conserve it, restore some fences to a better arrangement, and then they donated it to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department as a permanent refuge for these mule deer. So those 5,000 animals can always keep migrating through here with the least amount of risk involved. And so that's just an amazing story. We love telling that story. We'd love to see more things like that happen. Unfortunately, we have data to figure out where those bottlenecks are. Another great solution are these wildlife crossings. They don't all have to be beautiful, spectacular overpasses like Trapper's Point. A lot of these underpasses can do a lot for mule deer. This one was completed in 2012 by WYDOT and Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and was based on research that they completed before the Wyoming Migration Initiative even existed. So this is right on the path of the pronghorn, and it's reduced the pronghorn mortality in this area to basically zero. So this is what it was like before along that Trapper's Point to Daniel area. 2007, each of these dots is an animal killed. The purple are the mule deer, the red are the pronghorn. Hundreds of animals losing their lives in this gauntlet trying to get from their summer range to their winter range. Fast forward 2012, they put in the overpass, and basically no pronghorn died, especially at Trapper's Point. Every single one of them made it through. And so this is vastly, vastly helped. So we're not losing animals to just these pointless deaths along the highway. This kind of thing is happening. There's a lot of funding for this. And it's really exciting to see projects like this moving forward. There's also been hundreds of miles of wildlife-friendly fences that have been retrofitted across the Green River Basin. A lot of volunteer work that happens right here in Jackson Hole to fix these fences, make them easy to migrate so the adults can jump over, the fawns can crawl under, whatever they need. That reduces the risks to the animals as they're moving past all these 100 or more fences. Importantly, in some parts of the state, it's opening up previously inaccessible habitat for pronghorn, which is really exciting. Oh, I should tell you, this is one of our most popular videos ever. There's like 20 million views on Facebook for that. Oh, I should also credit my friend Tanner Ward, who set up that trail camera. The public has really given the social license to the state of Wyoming and nonprofits who have done a tremendous job of making wildlife and land conservation a priority. Wyoming has invested well over $150 million in public and private money in the past 15 years for collaborative projects that benefit these migratory animals. It's the many road projects that I referenced. It's the purchase of Kelly Parcel, other things like that, conservation easements. All of these projects, a couple of them directly help Deer 255, right? From the improved fences that she was crossing to highway projects to conserving Fremont Lake. And so much of this work has been done by so many different players, and they all built this culture together. And I hope we continue to see more momentum in conservation successes like this. So by 2021, I've been following Deer 255's migration for 5 years, and I could see how she moved across the map in these animations, how her life was intersecting with all this history and these conservation efforts. And I decided I needed to try to see her with my own eyes in all 4 seasons so I could get a better understanding of what her life was like on the ground, tell her story as best I could. And it turned out to be a much greater challenge than I expected to try and spot her in the wild. This was not Bear 399 posing by the side of the highway for 100 tourists or 500 tourists with the cameras, right? This was a mysterious, elusive deer who did not want to be found. The first place I tried to close in on her was up Cache Creek, so 5 miles up from Jackson Town Square. It's fall migration. She's a long way up in the mountains, and I got together with my friend Mike Zeman, and we got on our mountain bikes. We rode as far as we could back up Cache Creek until it got too muddy. We ditched our bikes and kept hiking. And we hiked up into the snow, and we started seeing these mule deer tracks. And we encountered these places that were like mule deer gardens. Little patches of mountain mahogany just covered with tracks and scat. Basically, it was a stopover where deer like 255 were spending the last couple days browsing on that forage for summer. And unfortunately, that picture I just showed you of the snow falling, that's all we saw that day. Because we got as close as we could. We heard her signal on the receiver, the GPS collar, the radio transmitter was beeping at us, but she disappeared down into these trees. We were not near stealthy enough to find her, but it was still an awesome adventure. Next time I tried to spot her was on Winter Range, more than 150 miles south in the Lucite Hills. It was February 15th, 2022. And Tanner Warder and Luke Wild, they took me right to where 255 was. Those are the field biologists who were experts at tracking this herd and counting their fawns out in the field. It's a whole different game down there in the range because you can see so much further. And I'm thrilled to share with you this video. For 20 minutes, I got this incredible look at her, best look at her I ever got. And you'll notice she's staring at us. It's the best look she ever got at me too. And she's just highly alert. She knows we're not supposed to be there. Her fawns are kind of, what's going on, Mom? They're bedding down. They're looking to her for direction. There might be a yearling fawn from a previous year here with two fawns as well. So this was just an incredible sighting to be able to see her. You can see she's got that yellow tag. It says number 24 on it. That's just a visual so you can see with binoculars which animal it is. So that was incredible. Spring migration, we're now returning to where we started the talk, right? I was in the woods above the Little Jenny Ranch. I stayed under that pine tree for an hour watching all these deer moving through the aspens until finally I saw something different, and it was deer 255 walking straight at me with that yellow tag that you saw. And she was so close that her face just filled up my binoculars. And it was just spectacular. I remember that feeling for the rest of my life. She was heading right towards me, and she was on high alert because she smelled or heard that there was an intruder in the woods. And then my camera went to sleep on the tripod next to me and made this click noise. And it blew my cover. She knew that there was something there that wasn't supposed to be, and she was gone in a flash. I didn't get a picture. All I got was, seeing her dash over this hill with a couple deers behind her. And it was, it's still just an amazing thing to be out there and see her. And, it was, I appreciated it much more than just seeing a regular deer in an agricultural field, grazing on some alfalfa. This was a wild, cagey deer doing what she does best. This is what she was like. As part of her personality, she was elusive. She was keen in her senses. She knew when stuff was sneaking up on her. She was watching all the time, and sneaking up on her in conditions like this was almost impossible. Later, I tried to spot her on Summer Range. So this is September 27th, 2022. And she spent the summer on this hill right behind Triangle X Ranch. Do you remember me mentioning Triangle X Ranch at the beginning of the talk where Pattie was? Well, deer 255 was there too. She spent the entire summer on this incredibly steep mountain, just 10 miles straight east from the Grand Teton. Climbing up there with a PhD student, Luke Wild, who leads the study, was just a real challenge. It was one of the steepest hills full of blowdown that I have ever hiked. Footing was horrible. It's just like walking up a gravel pile, and the rocks are falling down all around us. She spent the entire summer in this incredible security terrain. We stood in some of her exact GPS points, but again, it was a very lush place. Especially those north slopes, some of the vegetation was really high, and that she had been in that cool area, just eating everything she needed all summer. And of course, we never got so much as a glimpse at her that day. We did, however, take a detour the next day to this spot, which is about 2 miles north, where we picked up a couple of GPS points. And we couldn't tell from the maps what she was doing. Why was she going out to these different locations? She did it 3 times that summer. So we went out there, and on the ground, it turned out she was coming to a salt lick that was used by all these different animals. It's all tracked up. Basically, it's a place where water will sit and evaporate, and in the mud that was left there, there are all these shells and things. And so there's some kind of mineral or nutrient that she knew that she needed to get there to support her nutrition. And then she would go back and graze on that summer range for a couple more weeks. So deer 255, she knew about this place. We looked at the GPS data. She'd been at this place several years in the past, several times. And so she kept coming back to it because it was supporting her nutrition. By the way, that's the Grand Teton peeking over in the center right there. And then I saw deer 255 one more time a year later in the Prospect Mountains, which is the fall autumn stopover where they spend. A lot of these deer are there for the entire month of November during the rut. And I went out there with Luke Wild again, and also the journalist Christine Peterson and Ryan Dorgan, the photographer. And we climbed up on these rocky summits to have this incredible view of Prospect, right, to the Wind River Range. There were eagle traps up there from Native Americans. It was just a spectacular place. And we peeked over this ridge just in time to see 255 and a group of animals running away from us into the aspens. And within minutes, she was a mile away. And that was the last time that I saw her alive. She headed to Winter Range near Superior, Wyoming, December and January and March. Spent the winter down there. And then unfortunately, deer 255 died in the night on April 13th, 2024. It was up on Steamboat Mountain in the Red Desert, and she had just started her spring migration. And this is where it was. So the location was this little bowl that had these this brush growing in it on the side of this ridge. And she started over here on the right side and moved a little bit in the middle. And then there's this cluster of points over here where she died. And so from the signs on her body, we think that probably a mountain lion got her. And it was perhaps hiding out on this flat spot, just a little bit uphill, where he could ambush her and make a downhill run. And it was very close. And anyway, I went out to the spot to collect her collar with Luke Wild. And of course, it was springtime in the Red Desert, so we got stuck in a snowbank. And we didn't arrive to her body until well after dark. And it was a pretty heavy experience to be out there. I was really surprised at how much her death affected me. It brought up all these feelings of grief that I recognized from other people I've lost in the family. She lived wild, and I was relieved that she died in this natural way, and she returned to the land and became food. So Luke and I, we set up a trail camera to try and see if we could spot this mountain lion. And instead, this is what we captured. Yeah, deer 255's body getting lifted up in the sky by an eagle, golden eagle. So several other animals visited her body. There were also a lot of flies, as you can imagine. Little voles and mice and things, but we never saw a mountain lion. So this is what we're left with, is one animal's story of migration, which I hope you can see as something far bigger than just her life. It's something that's crucial for her herd, for the state of Wyoming, for the Rocky Mountains, for ungulates all around the planet that are making migrations like this. We documented 7 of her summer ranges, and we gained a new understanding of what's possible for a migrating mule deer. So, once she was gone, we started tracking her stats, adding them up, her lifetime mileage. She was born in 2013 in June. She died in April 2024. During that time, we think she made 22 fall and spring migrations. 14 of those were documented by GPS. One of them was partial, and they were about 200 to 242 miles each. So 217 was the average. And in total, if you add up all of the spring and fall migrations, you get somewhere between 2,800 miles, clear up to 4,500 miles, if you would have the absolute longest possibility, counting all the missing data and things like that. And so to put that in perspective, she could have walked across this entire continent, from New York to San Francisco or Edmonton to El Paso. One question we were not able to answer was whether she ever successfully passed on her migration route to an offspring. And that's because we never were able to collar one of her fawns and then see where that one migrated. We got very close. We were able to collar one fawn, and genetics showed that it was the right. It was a match. We found her, one of her offspring. And it says down here, dam qualifies. So that means her genetics matched up with the fawn. And unfortunately, this was in that winter of 2023-24. And the fawn didn't survive the winter. In fact, it died just a couple of weeks before Tier 255 died herself. But she still had 13 fawns that we know of, and probably 15 in total. And it's very possible that one of these animals survived into adulthood and could be out there right now behind Triangle X Ranch, or over here on the mountain where she spent a summer, or over there in the Rockefeller Parkway where she spent another 2 summers, or clear over in Island Park. So we'll never probably figure that out, but it's still fun to think about. And so now that Deer 255 is gone, it's my hope that telling this story can help people understand what these animals go through, how important these movements are to the land, how humans have connected to these migrations for thousands of years, and hopefully we'll still be doing it thousands of years more into the future. So there's a huge amount of people that helped me out on this project. Especially I want to thank Tanner and Luke, who took me out in the field and answered every question I had about Deer 255 over many years, many emails. I've got a whole list of colleagues and friends. These are the biologists, the writers who are part of my writing group in Laramie, my colleagues in the Kaufman Lab, the Wyoming Migration Initiative, and the cartographers that I work with at the University of Oregon, the Monteith shop crew that collected all of that ultrasound data, and other collaborators, folks who met me out in the field in Pinedale, Superior, Jackson, and more. There's a lot of collaborators that are behind this research, Wyoming Game and Fish and BLM in particular, and the University of Graphics Lab that made all these, makes a lot of these maps. And then finally, we've got a lot of research funders. There's dozens of them that require to make a project like this happen. And in particular, I want to mention the U.S. Geological Survey that funds my boss, Matt Kaufman, and his job. Wyoming Game and Fish, that is the prime collaborator in all these research studies. And then the Knobloch Family Foundation and the George B. Storer Foundation that supported my work for several years. So with that, one more shout out to the Pattie Laser Greater Yellowstone Nonfiction Creative Writing and Journalism Fellowship. How's that, Billy? And I'll answer any questions. Thank you so much, everybody.